the largest and most effective regional Israel economic support organization in North America, based here in Atlanta. And this program today is a product of our professional committee, whose chairman is Ben Fink, who's Herman Fink Van Horn. Fortunately, he's out of town today, so he's asked me to sit in for him. And I'll do the best I can. We've got an excellent speaker for you today on, I think, a timely topic. And I think we're going to have a real interesting program. I know that we've got a varied group here. We've got quite a few lawyers who will find it especially interesting, and also there's the opportunity for the CLE credits. I'm sure you know about that. Those of you who are not lawyers, we think there will still be enough interesting content, and that Jeremy will be certainly a great connection for you, that you'll find it a stimulating talk, and hopefully walk away from here knowing more than you did when you came in this morning, and hopefully have the opportunity to have not only understanding, but to build a connection with certainly one of Israel's very finest and most renowned IP attorneys. Those of you who are not members, we'd like to encourage you to think about joining our chamber. We've always got room for more. Shelley has, I think, some materials at the registration table, and if you'd like to talk to myself, Evan Reamer, who is standing in the back, or Guy Tesler, who's busy here doing the AV, we'd be happy to talk to you about that. I also want to welcome one of our members who's joining us today in Charlotte, North Carolina. Rick, are you with us?
We're working on it.
Oh.
You can see us, but there's
Okay.
Rick, can you hear us?
I can now, thank you.
Hey, Rick, welcome. We can't see you, but we can hear you, and hopefully you're going to be able to see us.
I can see you perfectly, thanks, Tom.
Okay. So we are a regional organization. We do have members in other cities in the Southeast, and as we move forward, we're going to make every effort we can to find ways for our members who, like Rick, is a lawyer in Charlotte, to participate in our committee meetings and our events like this. And so we're happy that we figured out a way to do that through our teleconferencing, our video conferencing provider of choice, the Israeli company. Okay, so with that being said, I'd like to introduce our co-host and sponsor today. This program is being brought to you by the American Israel Chamber of Commerce, our educational affiliate, the American Israel Educational Institute. And Chuck Gans is the president of that organization. Chuck, you're back. Thank you, Chuck. Anybody who would like to make a charitable donation to our cause, Chuck is happy to talk to you. You got to get by him if you want to leave the room. So. Greg, you'll talk about housekeeping issues, and so I want to introduce now an very active member and leader of our chamber, Greg Kirsch, with the firm Ballard Spahr. Greg got involved with the chamber, I think, at least 15 years ago. We had a young professional group, and he graduated into the big leagues, and he's been a stalwart. He's built a really wonderful Israel-focused practice, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. And it was through his connection with Jeremy that not only we got Jeremy involved and became active in the chamber, but we're bringing you today's program. So without any further ado, please welcome and thank Greg Kirsch for helping us put this together.
Thank you very much. I'm Greg Kirsch, and for those of you, actually I see a lot of familiar faces here in the room. Some of you I don't know. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Greg Kirsch. I'm a partner at Ballard Spahr, where I practice patent and intellectual property law. We're actually located up here on the 10th floor. And thank you all for attending. I think this is going to be a great event. Very glad to have Jeremy here with us from Israel, and a great turnout. I think close to 50 people showed up, plus our Rick Glazer in Charlotte. Great to have everybody participating. I'd like to especially thank the co-sponsors, in addition to my firm Ballard Spahr. The co-sponsors, as Tom mentioned, are of course the American Israel Chamber of Commerce, who provided the video conference logistics and the registration logistics and coordination of food and just a lot of support. And so I'd like to thank Tom and Guy Tesler and Evan Reamer and Shelley Samak out in the registration table for all their help. If you're not a member of the American Digital Chamber of Commerce, I would highly recommend you become so, because it is, as you might know, I don't think Tom wants to toot his own horn, but this binational chamber, the American Digital Chamber of Commerce Southeast region, is by far the most active and effective binational chamber, I think, in Atlanta and also among all the different Israel chambers of commerce around the country. So it's a great organization, a lot of good networking, a lot of good activity, and so I'd highly recommend you join if you have not already done so. Also, I want to thank the State Bar of Georgia, specifically the IP, the Intellectual Property section, and the International Law section, both of whom also agreed to co-sponsor this with us today. Unfortunately, Steve Whitmore, the chair of the IP section, cannot be here. Rivka Monheit, are you here? Yes, there's Rivka. She is the chair of the patent committee. She was very helpful in helping to put this on. Thank you, Rivka. And Michael Tannenbaum as well, also helped out a great deal in helping to secure CLE credit. For those lawyers of you in the audience, you'll be receiving 1 hour of CLE credit for this presentation. And also on the international law section side, Greg Cinnamon, who also cannot be here today, was a lot of help as well. So I'd like to introduce Jeremy. I've known Jeremy for probably 15 some odd years. We go way back, and I've had the pleasure to work with him both in the United States and also in Israel on a number of occasions, and great guy. He has built himself with his partners one of the top IP firms in Israel. And so certainly recommend you reach out to him if you have IP needs in Israel. He has a nice operation. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeremy. He's a licensed Israel patent and trademark attorney with over 20 years experience. He holds a UK degree in civil engineering, and after immigrating from England to Israel in 1984, he co-founded JMB Company together with his father, Dr. Stanley Davis. In August 2008, JMB Company merged with Factor Patent Attorneys, another IP firm in Israel, to form JMB Factor & Company, which is one of Israel's leading IP firms. And having visited their offices in Jerusalem several times, I can tell you they have a top-notch operation. Jeremy is active in several professional organizations. He's a member of the Israel Association of Patent Attorneys, AIPPI, and INTA. And he's also a former INTA committee member. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jeremy. One more thing, Jeremy's going to speak for about an hour, and plus or minus, and we're going to have some time for question and answer as well. So if you have any questions, Jeremy, it's your choice. You can either take the questions during the presentation or you can wait until the end of the presentation. So without further ado, JMB Ben-David.
Okay, first of all, let me just say thank you to everyone who facilitated this. Tom Glazer, since I've become involved with the Chamber of Commerce, it's always been very interesting and challenging to see what's going on, see how we can fit in. There's obviously this two-way relationship, between states and Israel. And here we're talking about specific initiatives that, such as the missions that Tom and everyone else in this organization puts on to Israel. I had the privilege to take part in one of them. It was about a year ago, and I was simply floored. Not simply by the quality of the people that came with, but also the doors that they managed to open. So I guess sort of echoing Greg, one is forced to say that this is a very, very good organization, and definitely, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Which brings me on to Guy. Hopefully Guy is not missing out, nor is he missing. His coordinating the video conference logistics with Charlotte, so I don't know how many people came to Charlotte in the end, but welcome anyway. The State Bar of Georgia was also sponsoring this. I understand that Steve Wigram was not here, but Rivka and Michael, thank you very much for your part in facilitating this. Together with Greg Cinnamon, as the chair of the International Law section of the State Bar. Last but by no means least, I really have to say a big thank you to Greg. Wonderful host, also wonderful guest. When he's come over to us, I think you presented on at least one occasion together with us, and it is a relationship which, on a personal level, as far as I'm concerned, personal is always more important than business. Business is sort of what we do when we get up in the morning, and then sometime during the day, and then you have all the important stuff. So on a personal level, Greg's a great guy, great host, and thank you for everything. And thank you for everyone for coming. I realized that if I'd changed the subject to what's going on in Egypt today, people would have been lined up in the street to get in. But as it is, it's a great turnout. I was actually supposed to be coming a year ago, and as I'm sure that some of you are aware, unfortunately, my father was very ill at the time and passed away soon after. I had to cancel the trip, and he was actually there. First of all, I would like to first of all dedicate this to his memory, Dr. Stanley Davis. I had the good fortune to work alongside him for 25 years. I didn't actually appreciate that when I was studying. He was an examiner in the UK Patent Office for about 25, 26 years before he and my mother made Aliyah, came to live in Israel. So in the mid-1980s, when I was studying with him for the Israel Patent Bar, I simply didn't have a clue as to how absurd it was. He could originally, when he was checking out options, to work in Israel, they told him in the patent office, don't apply here to be an examiner. You're way overqualified. So, as a kid, all that time ago, I didn't appreciate it. It was a great honor to study with him, to work with him. The last 14 years we were partners until, as Greg said, Michael Factor of Factor Patent Attorneys, we merged our practices in 2008. Just another word about my father. He was very modest. He was a brilliant man. He had 5 degrees that he never bothered talking about because they weren't important. And the one thing that he was consistent. What you saw on the outside, the sort of demeanor, the integrity, the professionalism, the way he was a father and a grandfather, he was consistent. And if there's one thing, to learn from him, there are many, that would be the one that I would stress. Now, I was at before I get on to the professional matter, I'm just going to say another minute about me, just so, some of you might be wondering how can I get such good English, and so on. But I was at a meeting a number of years ago of a bunch of professionals, CEO of this and an in-house of that, about a dozen people, and we were introducing ourselves. There were, all but one of the people there were men. And we went around the table and everyone spoke what they did professionally. Okay, that was, what their agenda was. We then came to the only woman at the table, and professionally she had probably achieved more than anyone else sitting around the table. And the first thing she opened was with the fact that I'm a mother of, I don't remember how many kids. That was the first thing she started with, because that was the most important. You know, then rabbis tell us that we have to learn from everyone. I'm going to learn from that lady. I'm the father of 4 beautiful daughters. I've had the privilege of one of them having been an officer in the Israeli army. One is currently a medic. And it is absolutely, when I was a kid, I had a dream to, you know, to make her out to go live in Israel. And, you know, never did I imagine the sort of, and I think everyone understands the word nachas, that I could get from seeing kids grow up like that. And so, as Greg said, I did grow up in the UK. I was educated there. In 1985, made Aliyah. And I went to live on a kibbutz. I won't go into that right now, but I did. Had a great time. But by 1985, I'd come into the world of IP. 87, I was licensed, and 1995, I went solo. 96, my father came on board, and I'm here today. Now, the subject that we're talking about is, again, in general, it's Israeli entrepreneurship, technological and innovation perspectives. The question is how you approach something like that. I'm not going to be going into specific case studies. There is, I understand we have a representative of Coca-Cola in the house, is that true?
He registered, but could not come today.
Okay, well, he'll be sorry when he hears about what what I've saved for the end. Okay? In any event, this, in a way, sums it up. Brother Craig, can we possibly turn the heating off? Yeah. This almost sums it up, and I could just walk out right now and, you know, leave you with this. As we know, there is a huge amount of technology that comes out of Israel. Most of it for what may be called, you know, justifiable political, economic reasons. It's sort of kept, you know, on the hush hush. Occasionally, you hear stories which I think are more funny than anything else. I don't know whether. I think we heard about the case of the sharks in the Mediterranean, reported a couple of months ago, that were apparently sort of Israeli spies. And I'm not kidding, that was a real story. Something that I thought would actually was a little bit more relates to this slide was, you know, people that deal with birds, ornithologists, they have all sorts of projects, they study the patterns that the birds fly. And it seems that Tel Aviv University has such a program. And there's an international, I guess, agreement, or convention, how you put rings on birds and you put some various identifiers. So when they fly somewhere and are caught or found, you know, they can say, okay, well, you know, the bird that you sent off from Tel Aviv landed in, I don't know, Iceland. A bird that was sent out from Tel Aviv landed, I think it was in Saudi Arabia or Yemen. So it actually it was found in the backyard of someone from the military. Took it. I don't know whether he realized there was Hebrew on it. Someone realized, which actually simply said University of Tel Aviv. And of course it became, you know, a spy story. So, you know, Israel is inside. Sometimes there are a lot more stories, a lot more than we give credit for, a lot more than actually happens. But when we look at actually what happens, there's a huge, huge amount. And I think most people are probably aware of this. Now, I'm going to divide the talk into 2 parts. The first is a discussion of Israel's technology status in the world. And, you know, as an IP attorney, I have a particular perspective. Clearly, you know, what I'm going to present is not an absolute. There's no such thing. You know, ultimately, no one ever does anything unless they want to do it. No one will patent in Israel unless they understand, and part of an understanding is always going to be an emotional choice as well, or common sense, as I think it was John McDonald I was talking to before I said. In any case, so I want to look at that overall picture. The second part, I want to discuss Israel's patent system. Now, I apologize if there might be certain things that will be less clear to the non-attorneys, but I'm not going to go in deep. Anyone that's handled patent applications in Israel, patent applications anywhere, should be able to follow what I'm going to be discussing. And clearly, the attractiveness that I'm talking about here is not, so why would I file in Israel? Hopefully that will come out in the first part. But it is, well, if I make the decision that I really need protection in Israel, is something going to put me off? Is it going to be expensive, complicated, or is it a system which actually has a lot of advantages? And we'll have a look at that. And then right at the end, as I said, I have something which is a little bit more fun. I think that maybe the best thing to do is to, as far as questions are concerned, we'll try and leave them until the end. We have allocated time for that. And then I think if there are any things which, anything can be asked, and if I answer it, if I know the answer, I'll answer it. If I don't know the answer, I'll say I have no idea. Mark Twain. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods a spell of a curse that has withered its fields and fettered its energies. Palestine is desolate and unlovely. It is a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. A desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace, with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the whole route. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, those fast friends of the worthless soil, had almost deserted the country. That was Mark Twain well over 100 years ago. So the Israel we're talking about, is it legend or reality? Soon after that, a few decades after Mark Twain wrote that description, came along Theodor Herzl. He's known as the father of the nation. And what he said is, if you will it, it is no mere legend. In Hebrew, im tirtzu, ein zu agada. But nonetheless, we know that simply by wanting something to happen, if you don't want it to happen, it will never happen. But simply wanting isn't enough, you also have to do. A couple of years ago, these two fantastic books came out. The one on the right, Startup Nation, is the one that everyone likes to quote. And to be perfectly honest, I think this is a wonderful book, super stories. And he says it's the story of Israel's economic miracle, but it's stories. It doesn't try and explain really what's beneath the surface, not terribly deeply. Something that I personally think is a wonderful book and a wonderful complement to the Startup Nation is this book called The Israel Test. Now, many of you may have heard of George Gilder. He's a financial whiz. He is not Jewish. And to be perfectly honest, I saw this book when I walked into Barnes & Noble in Manhattan a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, in fact. And it was on the latest releases, right in front of me. Now, I looked at that book, and with a cover like this, I said, oh boy. This is really going to be very, very anti-Israel, or it could be pro-Israel. It's a remarkable book. I won't spoil the story, but George Gilder fell in love with Israel and its high-tech economy about a little over 15 years ago now. He also asks a question, and I will just pose the question that he asks because, again, it's a terrific read. He asks, why do you have so many brilliant people in Harvard and Cambridge and various other places that are brilliant when it comes to everything except for Israel? can read the book. I really, really recommend it. He also, by the way, through the paradigm that he presents, he also suggests, a solution to the current political problems between Israel and the Arabs. And again, terrific read. These two books together provide all the information, way, way more than I could possibly give you, about specifics, specific stories and tales, in the hour or less now that I have. So I'm not even going to try. What I do want to do, here's the comment, by the way, that was quoted by Greg Aharoni and known to a number of people. This was basically all these books can do ultimately is to shine a light on what's going on in Israel, but no one can really understand, and it's true, no one really can understand precisely what the reason is. But nonetheless, shining a light, getting on board, that's pretty good too. Okay, so we're going to talk about Israel as a startup capital of the world. We're going to have a look at some facts. But again, it's taking a step back. And even though the facts that I'm going to be bringing mention numbers, mention dollars and cents, I'm by no means an economist, and but it's clear that I have an agenda. Israel, has done some amazing things, but let's have a look and see where exactly it stands relative to other nations. I then want to have a look at IP in Israel. I'll be mentioning trademarks as well, so it's not just patents. And along the way, we'll be having a look at comparative practices as far as patent is concerned between Israel and the United States. Now, okay, I'm not going to be testing anyone on this. I don't really claim to understand very much of this graph as it is. But what it does show, if you want to talk about startup companies, you have to have some sort of definition. Okay, what this diagram attempts to suggest is that any company that is between initial seed capital, initial investment, and an IPO is a startup. So we then actually see that if you look at the graph of a startup, okay, you're looking at early funding, you're looking at investment. And in fact, throughout the life cycle, you're going to be looking at more and more and more investment. And then, if you want to look at how successful startups have been, okay, look at IPOs. Again, there are lots of statistics. There is no one thing you can say, this is the objective truth, and this is always going to work, okay? That doesn't exist. But nonetheless, these two criteria, one can validly say are important in saying exactly how the startup nation status plays out. When you're looking not on how Israel used to be, which is in itself, an amazing story from, 1948 to today. I mean, how things have changed, and that in itself is amazing. But simply to say now we're on the playing field of the world. Where do we actually stand? So let's have a look at investment. This graph, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I copied from George Gilder's book, The Israel Test. But in any case, he's going back a couple of years, clearly till just before the property bubble burst, when in the United States, venture capital investment, it dropped slightly to just under $100 per capita. Okay, in Israel in that time, well, you can see it was more than double and going in the right direction. Now here, this is R&D expenditure as a percentage of gross domestic product. And again, as you can see, Israel is way ahead. Again, these are not absolute numbers, they're proportional. But nonetheless, in this index, Israel is way ahead than basically everywhere else. Japan's behind, United States is behind. Look at these countries, and then look at all the leading countries that don't even make it onto the list. What about IPOs? Well, The diagram was from when the book came out, but I checked as of 31st of December. There's a whole bunch of companies that are headquartered in the Cayman Islands of Bermuda. Okay, putting those to one side, and I actually found most of them appear to have Chinese names, or they appear to be originally Chinese. Nonetheless, putting those to one side, as of a month ago, 60% of non-US companies in the NASDAQ are Israelis. Okay, that's more also than Canada, which many people would find to be surprising. Let's have a look at some basic data for a couple of years ago. Israel had the 53rd largest GDP in the world. To put things in proportion, less than 1/10% of the GDP of the US. Now let's have a look at population. Okay, 97th is actually somewhere in the middle. Depends, every sort of list you look at gives a different number of countries in the world, which is a little bit surprising. You think they haven't figured out by now. But in any case, so we're way down. Okay, less than half of 1%, less than 1.1% of China's population. So that's, let's put those to one side, and I just want to talk about intellectual property, and we'll get back to the numbers in a second, because it's important to understand what we're doing with the numbers through the IP prism. There are three types of intellectual property that exist in Israel, okay, that are registered. We have patents in the United States, so those will be utility patents. Registered designs, United States, design patents, and there are trademarks. Patents and trademarks are very different in nature. Patents, arguably, are a very good indicator of innovation. Whereas trademarks, they're indicative of commerce. And I'm going to be bringing some comparative numbers for both how the patents divide down from country of origin, and also as far as field is concerned. And also we'll have a look at trademarks as well, just to round off the picture. But clearly, if we want to have a look and see how is the nation doing, the nation of Israel doing in terms of innovation, it is far more important to look at patents than it is simply to look at commerce. We could look at a lot of the commerce done in the Gulf states. Tremendous amount of commerce, way more than in Israel. Innovation, almost nothing. As an aside, a not very useful statistic, but it's one of these. This is a trivia that it's useful to put out apart, I guess. If you take all of the patent applications filed that originate from the entire Arab world, they are left in 1 year. They are less than comes out of Israel. Interesting perspective. So let's have a look at innovation. So therefore we're talking about patents. Now when you're talking about patents, you've got outbound, what originates in Israel, okay, and you have inbound, what other companies, non-Israeli companies, want to file in Israel to protect their own, whether it's a market share, to protect their technology share, to stymie their competitors. But if we want to look at Israel in the world as a whole, it's going to be mainly the outbound applications, patent applications. Okay, now, I don't expect you all to look at this, and by the way, I will be able to mail this presentation to anyone afterwards that's interested, so you can have a look at these lists in a little bit more time and a little bit more closely. What I've presented on the left, actually, what I've reproduced is the resident patent filings, okay, as a function of GDP. Okay, what that means is that you have it is the number of local, say the number of US citizens or companies filing patent applications, okay, as a proportion of the gross domestic product of the United States. And what we see here is that when one takes this index, we see Korea's at the top, US is down there in 4th position, Kazakhstan is in their 11th position. Israel isn't 12th. I don't know why we're not higher than Kazakhstan, but as Disraeli said, lies down lies in statistics. But nonetheless, Israel being up there in 12th position, okay, to the economists, I'm sure that means something. It's better to be up there than way, way down. And again, what is often, I've looked at these numbers over and over again, what is often more astounding is not so much the countries that are ahead of Israel, but the countries that are behind. Take the UK, France, where are they? Okay, another statistic, the number of PCT filings per GDP. Now, a PCT filing is an international application that most people in the world these days can file, and essentially it indicates an intent to export technology that you wish to protect. Okay? Now, just as by way of a little story about this, Israel joined the PCT organ. The PCT stands for Patent Cooperation Treaty. Israel joined this treaty back in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. And at the time, Israel is a very small country, and you're bumping into people all the time. So one evening I bumped into Michael Ophir, who was the then commissioner of patents. Very, very nice guy. And he sat down, we schmoozed for a bit, and I said, so what's going on with the PCT? We just joined it, what do the numbers look like? He said, well, the guys in Geneva told me that we should expect for a country of our size to be filing about 10 applications a month. Within the first few months, it was clear that they were out by one order of magnitude. There are about 100 applications coming out every month. Israelis could not wait to get on the bandwagon, and they had a tremendous number of filings that were outgoing. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the detailed numbers here, but if you look at the number of PCT filings per GDP, and remember how the GDP of Israel compared to that, for example, of the States, Israel is in 4th place. The States, by the way, is down the bottom of this list. And again, as I mentioned before, what about all countries that didn't even make it onto this top 10, top 11 or 12? Where are they? Okay, now this is the PCT patent filings per capita. Okay, you can see that there are 2 areas that I've ringed. One is identifying Israel on the 4th line there. I guess I've given it away. And you go over to the right and see the rank is number 4. So maybe the guys over in Geneva, running the PCT should have tried predicting the future a little bit better. But I guess we can't blame them. Okay, so in summary, if we're looking at outgoing PCT filings as an indication of export, okay, it's an indication of exporting technology, an indication of innovation in the country, and again, which are contributing to the world. And again, parenthetically, if you talk about whether it's Jewish or Israeli contributions to the world, look at there's enormous lists out there, and without such contribution, the world would be a very, very different place. That's for sure. So in summary, okay, in terms of PCT applications for $1 billion GDP, Israel is placed 4th. Yes, Switzerland, Sweden, and Finland are before it. But again, look at what's behind. It sort of reminds me of this bumper sticker. You see someone's riding in an old sort of rusty jalopy, and there's a bumper sticker that says, my car may be falling apart, but it's ahead of you. And again, the per capita PCT applications, again, Israel places 4th. Again, I'm not going to attempt to explain it. I think that's probably beyond most people's abilities, certainly beyond mine. But if we asked, where does Israel stand relative to the rest of the world, I think we're getting some answers. Now, what about Israel as a destination? Okay, there are folks that file in Israel. We're aware of that. But again, what do the numbers really say? Now, I will just, so that there are no misunderstandings, there are relatively few applications that make it to Israel. If in the States you're talking about, what is it, between 300,000 and 400,000 new patent applications every year, okay, in Israel you're talking about around about 7,500 or 8,000. Okay, so, but again, maybe that number has to be taken in context. I've not brought all the numbers here. I think in the handouts, by the way, I think a lot of these numbers are reproduced in more detail. But there are two facts I'm looking at. One is that if you're looking at filings per GDP, it means the number of patent applications, again, taken as a function of GDP, Israel is the 7th most popular patent destination. Again, look at the countries that preceded. I see actually I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries there. I think there's another one missing. I think 7th is right. But again, CU is not on the list. In absolute terms, there's no question that Israel is in fact the 2nd-tier destination. Okay, we have to be realistic. Why do I say we should be realistic? Because ultimately, when you're making decisions, when you're spending money, or advising your clients to spend money, that money has to come from somewhere. And it's not coming from me, and it's not coming from you, it's coming from the clients. Or from some of you in the room as well. So Israel is a 2nd-tier destination after the US, China, Japan, Europe, and Korea. But as I said, let's think about that bumper sticker. Why do people file in Israel then? Because the ability to stifle competition at source. There's a tremendous amount of development, and we'll have a look at this again in sort of overall terms. Tremendous amount of development going on in certain fields in Israel. And where that development is happening, you want to be able to hopefully stop your competitors there. So, because of this, Israel, and the numbers actually show us that Israel is as attractive as up-and-coming places like India. Okay, Russia is also becoming definitely a place where there are serious markets, serious technology. And Australia is always, Australia is 3 times as big as Israel, but there are actually many comparisons between Australia and Israel. One of them, of course, or not of course, but it is in fact true, in relative terms, Israel is as attractive as Australia. Another factor, and I alluded to this before when I was talking about what makes Israel attractive as a patent destination in terms of how the system operates, the low cost of filing and prosecution, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. So now, we've had a look at the overall numbers, of Israel and the world. Let's drill down a little bit more, and we'll have a look at some patent trademark statistics. Okay, this, I see that I didn't put the year on here. I think these numbers are taken, if I'm not mistaken, from 2008. Okay, the largest area, the pale yellow area at the bottom, pharma, biotech, industrial chemistry, 34%. Fully 1/3 of all applications filed are in those fields. And I haven't done analysis of this, but clearly the vast majority of these are going to be in pharmaceuticals and biotech. There's a huge amount of it going on. I know we handle a lot of it. I'm guessing that in fact that in terms of work coming from overseas, we're seeing more than 34% of the work comes to us being in those fields. Medical devices actually close second. They've got 29%, human necessities. Electricity and physics, well, there's a bit of an optical illusion here. It looks like one's 10%, one's 13%, but they really have to be combined. You've got 23%, which is all the high-tech stuff. Computer hardware and software, telecommunications. The others are less significant but exist. Okay, what I've reproduced on the right here is actually a diagram which was included in a printed record of an interview with the outgoing Israel Commissioner of Patents, Dr. Meir Noam. Did a fantastic job. But as a civil servant, after 7 years, they said that's enough, goodbye. We now have an acting commissioner, and there's a saying in Israel, there's nothing more permanent than that which is temporary. So he was supposed to finish, it was just supposed to be for a month, till 31st of January. But I know that from a connection with one of the candidates who's actually just joined our firm as a litigator, that even after the end of January, they were still finalizing the procedures to apply. So this is probably going to be a good few months still. In any event, so these were numbers which were cited in the name of the outgoing commissioner. And to cut a long story short, you've got, here he says, looking through to 2006 to 2010, 7,500 applications per year. The vast majority come from overseas, okay, which you can understand, because they are trying to stymie their competitors, and again in specific fields. We saw fields of life sciences and high-tech medical devices. And if anyone that cares to look at various PCT reports that come out, those fields appear time and time again. But those are the areas where Israel is leading, or shall we say, either leading or among the leaders. Clearly, Israeli companies as well are going to file domestically, but their initial filing is normally going to be in the States. Sometimes a provisional application, sometimes a full utility, and they'll normally enter the national phase in Israel, but they're among these 20% domestic. Now, for anyone that can read the Hebrew, I'm not asking you to, but anyone that can, there's a list on the left of this diagram, the print, which that list is actually companies. Okay, we have here some numbers that say who's actually filing in Israel. Give me some names. It's like in Syria where the results of the election are brought to the president, and say, well, Mr. President, again you got 99.99% of the vote. Of course, his reaction is, well, I want the names of the other 0.001%. So we see that again over the past 5 years, Qualcomm, okay, is actually, they filed the most. They're in telecom. But look at the next four, all in pharma. Not terribly surprising. Following it are the leading Israeli companies. You have Yeda. Yeda, as many of you may know, is one of the university companies. A glaring omission, to my mind, by the way, is the fact that Yisum is not there. Yisum is a tech transfer company of the Hebrew University. It is also the reason that the Hebrew University is the richest university in the country, with income, I understand, in excess of $100 million annually from its intellectual property. Second on the list is Iskar. Now, you'll see there's an asterisk there. I don't remember either one of the books that we talked about or both of the books. Iskar gets an honorable mention by virtue of the fact that Warren Buffett purchased it. Iskar is apparently his first foreign investment. He bought them for several $100 million. And he came out during the Second Lebanese War in 2006.
Germany was $4.5 billion. 80% of the company for $4.5 billion.
You're right. I forgot the few zeros. I guess it's like was it Rockefeller, a million here, a million there. So you're talking big money. Thank you. Iskar, by the way, for anyone not in the know, makes, among other things, blades for Rolls-Royce engines. So anyway, Teva is just behind. Teva, by the way, has an in-house IP department that, if it were in private practice, would be the largest firm in Israel. a few years ago, I had cause to talk to Yehuda Livner, who runs the practice in-house. And so I asked him about, how are you guys doing with lawsuits? He said, well, at any one time, we're handling about 50 lawsuits around the world. However, I have to say one thing. Teva is normally represented, and I would say these days misrepresented, as being a generic company. It is generic, that's true. And that's how it started, that's how it got ahead. But you see, even from this, its positioning in Israel, it is fighting patent applications. It's not fighting patent applications by being just a generic company. But half of its activity is in developing ethical drugs. Okay, the last two there, Raphael and Israel, they used to be called, back in the 80s, they were Israel Aircraft Industries. These days they're Israel Aerospace, one of our clients. So you see, that's how things pan out. Again, you see the fields which are leading, and you can see, again, as the president of Syria would have said, give me some names. Let's have a look at trademarks for a second. This doesn't necessarily see where Israel is positioned innovatively, but nonetheless, to get a good idea as to what's going on in Israel, certainly commerce-wise, it's not a bad thing to look at. So this pie chart, which I did not create, came from the Patent Office. This pie chart indicates where most of the trademarks are coming from. Again, it indicates commerce. So Israel, although it doesn't have a majority, clearly 32% of the registered trademarks in Israel are owned by Israeli companies, which is what you'd expect. The US, has 23%. By the way, I should add that when you're looking at patents, if we said that, a few slides back, we said 80% of patents were coming from overseas. Approximately, if I'm not mistaken, around about 40% of those come from the US. Okay. So the number, the number coming from the United States, as far as trademarks is concerned, that is slightly lower. And then you see other trading partners: France, Germany, Italy, UK has 6%, and then there's a whole slew of others of 16%, which again is what you would expect, because you trade where you have opportunities. Applications sorted by area for the same year. Okay, so we see this divides down, going down to the bottom, computer and communication services, 18%, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, 10%. Food and drinks, there are virtually no patents in food and drinks, but you buy and sell, and you still have services there. That more or less rounds off the initial part of this presentation as to where Israel is relative to the world. And again, I'm not an expert when it comes to economics, financials, anything like that. And I'm sure that there are a lot more statistics out there, some of which are relevant, some of which will be total red herrings. But we certainly get an idea that whether the numbers that I brought are really spot on, or whether they're slightly different, Israel's up there. But it has an economy which is so tiny, compared to the world leaders, yet is ahead of the world leaders in many respects. Something's happening there. There's something good. Now, here's where I apologize to the non-practitioners or those who don't have very much experience with patents. I do want to just drill down a little bit and look at the Israel patent system. I won't dwell on these points. They're fairly technical, but they're nonetheless good to know. First of all, patentable inventions. This is pretty much the same the world over, except when you get to the technological character, the particular terminology that's used in different places. So what does that mean? I'll leave that as a question, because I don't think anyone could responsibly actually provide an answer. I know that the US courts are always coming up with their own proclamations as to what it means. If they can't sort it out, then I'm keeping still. Okay, and again, like everywhere else, novelty, inventive step utility, no surprises there. Okay? Now, technological character, however, in Israel and most of the world outside the US, does exclude methods of therapeutic treatment. I'm aware that in the US it's sort of on the books, but it's almost impossible to enforce, patent for a method of treatment. In Israel, you can't patent it. It excludes overtly business methods. Again, needs no particular explanation, but of course, it's one of those things that the minute you get beneath the surface, you get into this whole big quagmire. I'm not going there, but it's a heading. And software inventions, again, which are non-technological, and like, come on, what does that mean? We actually had a wonderful parting gift from the outgoing commissioner, Dr. Noam. He issued a bunch of guidelines regarding software. And by the way, I don't know if anyone will remember this, but in the early 90s, beginning of the 90s, when the whole question of can you patent software or not came up, there was a very, very significant case that went to the court. It was appealed to the court. The patent office said you cannot patent. It was appealed to the court, and while the court was deliberating on this for about 1 or 2 years, the patent office put a complete moratorium on continued prosecution of anything they deemed to be a software patent. So we had, all these patents that were all of a sudden they were stopped. Nothing was happening, and nothing would happen until the court decided. But of course, even though the court, essentially what the court decided was that software, where you have it in combination with some sort of hardware, is patentable. Again, I don't want to go any more into that because we never finish. As I started to say, the commissioner left us with a present issuing new guidelines for software, but it had a sting in the tail. The sting in the tail was that we will soon be issuing some complete guidelines. So what does that mean? Did you just tell us what the story is, or did you tell us I'm telling you a story, but don't pay any attention because later on we're going to tell you something else? Anyway, the bottom line is, it's don't pay any attention because later on we're going to tell you something else. So we obviously we're in the middle of prosecuting software inventions, and we get an office action based on a moving target. So the situation is at the moment we've asked for suspension of prosecution until the patent office gets its act together. Not satisfactory, but it's some comfort knowing that we're not alone in this type of issue. And again, Swiss type use claims in pharmaceuticals, they are allowable in Israel. But by the way, before anyone wants to go there, I'm not a chemist by any shape or form. Okay, basics. The patent term in Israel, like everywhere else in the world, is 20 years from the effective filing date. The effective filing date in Israel, as everywhere else in the world, is the PCT filing date where this is applicable. Okay, otherwise it's the date of actual filing. And yes, in Israel too, you can get up to 5 years of an extension, provided you're for a pharmaceutical patent, provided you're talking about a basic patent for the composition which is being patented. In other words, if you're talking about some sort of follow-on, then it's unlikely that you're going to be able to receive extension. In Israel, you may file the specification essentially in any language. There are a number of official languages, English, Hebrew, and Arabic. I have seen a handful of applications filed in Hebrew, none in the last decade. I've never seen an application filed in Arabic. I'm not sure whether there will be an examiner in the patent office who would know how to read it. There might be 1 or 2 actually, I take that back. And provisionally you may file in any language you want. You'll then have a few months to replace the specification. As in the rest of the world outside the US, there is no grace period. Okay, once you've disclosed, that's it. Unless of course you have a priority date before that disclosure. And in Israel, again, like most of the rest of the world, it's a first to file system. Okay, again, I'll run through the technicalities very quickly. In order to obtain a filing date, you don't need to complete all the red tape. Specification, details of applicant, pay the filing fee, give it a title. That's it. Okay, subsequently, you will have to finish off by filing translation of the specification. Okay, normally this never happens. I think 99.9%, we're not talking about the Syrian elections now, 99.9% of cases are filed in English. Okay, and I should emphasize, we put this in all our letters, we do not have to translate. We do need an original signed copy of power of attorney. Okay, which means that if we get one faxed over, we just, we leave it in the file. They just remind us, among other things, that remind us that we're waiting for the original. It has to be original document. We need a priority document, and we need formal figures if formal figures have not yet been filed. Examination cannot be requested per se. Okay, there's no examination fee. All these things are subject to change, by the way. There are proposals to make far-reaching changes in Israel patent law, but this is the current situation. Okay, it is relatively easy to accelerate examination in Israel. Okay, clearly whether or not to accede to a petition to accelerate is discretionary on the part of the Patent Office. However, saying that I have a commercial problem here, I cannot afford to be exposed, someone is making preparations to infringe, someone is importing goods which infringe, and so on, those are acceptable grounds. All it requires is a declaration as to the facts, and pay the fee, which is not very much, and acceleration actually works. You can get a patent in Israel registered within about a year to year and a half based on that, and a few other techniques which I'll relate to. As of the beginning of 2010, you can file a statement, and it's not a declaration, a simple statement, saying my invention is green. There's a company from whom we filed a bunch of applications for wind turbines. Okay, these days those are green. Something to bear in mind. And what is also important, if anyone has applications on file, that they've been waiting for a couple of years, and they are green, you can actually now submit a letter saying, well, actually these applications are green, could we accelerate them? And the answer should be yes. Okay, what about ongoing duty of disclosure? Okay, the bane of US patent practice, and I would say pretty much Israel patent practice as well. As a kickoff to examination, we get a notice prior to examination. Among the things that we're requested to provide are essentially all the prior art known to us. From that point on, we have an ongoing duty of disclosure until allowance. Okay, which means it's details of the cited art. Clearly, if you have, in a US application, references made in an IDF, that's a very neat way of packaging it. But if you're talking about Australian, Indian, Indonesian, wherever it is, come on guys, hand it over. We have to let them know. And if anything comes up in litigation, okay, as long as it's not secret information, that too has to be provided. The Patent Office has gone, I won't say crazy, but it is, the requirements are pretty much similar to now the situation in the States. There was a provisional requirement made a number of months ago that would require, or you also provide arguments that you had used in rebutting references cited against application. That was put on hold, but it just shows the direction that they're going in. There is substantive examination, but under Section 17C of the law, you can rely on examination, a successful examination, in another one of several countries where the examination is substantive and considered to be good. Okay, it's a matter of opinion whether the entire list follows that. This is only there are another bunch of countries as well. as opposed to a previous situation where it could be based on allowance only, in view of the fact that sometimes you can make post-allowance amendments in various countries, that has been tightened up, and it has to be on the basis of granted claims. There's also, however, if you get a positive search report, examination report in the PCT, you can also file that and use that as a basis to request modified examination. However, it's not yet been tried in court, and it may well be one years till that happens. Okay, post-allowance, there's publication for opposition purposes. There's a 3-month period of opposition. If no one files an opposition, then the patent is automatically granted. Oppositions are rare, but they do happen. Mainly pharmaceutical inventions, Camtech and Orbotech. They've also fallen out. Well, they haven't fallen out, but they've been on opposing sides in opposition. But again, most of the stuff is in pharma. Renewals, more or less like in the States, every 4 years. Okay, and they're not terribly expensive either. Certainly not the first few years. And if I once saw a statistic that said that if you look at the US, Europe, and Japan, after 10 years, only 50% of all patents are maintained. So certainly, if you're looking at the pretty much the renewal period, which appears almost at the top of that list, you pay your renewal at the end of the 6th year, takes up to the end of 10, and after that, either you will or you won't renew it. And anyway, certainly, if you have an invention, clearly pharmaceutical composition, most of the time you're going to keep it. High-tech stuff, most of the time probably not. Okay, so just to summarize, why is Israel such an attractive patent destination? Okay, no automatic publication, I didn't mention this. Okay, most major jurisdictions publish after 18 months, Israel does not. Again, this is subject to change, but currently it does not file, it does not publish. Okay, filing prosecution can be in English, so no translation costs. They are very, very flexible with amendments to the specification after filing. Okay, even if you make substantive amendments going beyond the original disclosure, they will not say you cannot do that, they will simply tell you to post-state them. Okay, modified examination, I've mentioned. Because of the various features above, it is relatively inexpensive. Okay, there is a fairly liberal regime with regard to extensions. You have 4 months to respond. A total of 50 months of extensions can be obtained throughout the pendency of the case. What I didn't mention here is that you can get up to 6 months of extensions, but you have to ask for them. You can suspend examination if you're waiting for a modified examination based, say, on your corresponding US patent, and it's taking a while to come, or say your corresponding European patent. You can get suspension based on that, and they'll allow it. By the way, I should add, modified examination is not a rubber stamp. Modified examination essentially is a recommendation that if the guy in the examiner in the European Patent Office thought this was patentable, well, so should you. Does it mean the examiner cannot open any of the issues that apparently had been solved? It doesn't mean that. What it does mean is he has to go to the supervisor and say, listen, I think we've got a really good case here for rejecting these claims, notwithstanding the fact that obviously a damn good examiner in Europe or the States allowed them. And in that case, we will then be told that a modified examination request has been rejected and that we need to prosecute on the merits. Clearly that's annoying. It happens, I would say, maybe 1 time out of 10. But if it does happen, then my feeling is that it means the examiner has actually caught something which maybe the other guy should have caught, and a minor inconvenience, I could actually save a tremendous amount of heartache and wasted money down the road by getting claims that are invalid. Okay, thorough examination we talked about, and yes, patents are enforceable through the courts. The court system in Israel is not perfect. I realize that comes as a surprise. The judges, I read an article the other day comparing, in Israel there's a rabbinical court system which for, I guess, civil matters you can go to as opposed to the regular courts. And they said that in the regular courts, you're hiding behind your lawyers. Lawyers are always drafting briefs and declarations to suit the intended outcome. The judges are looking at those, and there's very, very little substantive and meaningful contact between them and the two sides who are arguing. Whereas in the rabbinical court system, the lawyers come in afterwards, after the intermission. The judges there, the dayanim, they want to speak to the two guys that are fighting. And they want to talk to them, they want to try to, as we said when I was growing up in England, they want to suss out what's really going on here. No, don't bring me lawyers, don't bring me depositions and everything else. I want to know what's going on. In Israel, it is, we're talking about the regular court system here. I don't think that the fact that you have the people hiding behind lawyers makes much of a difference, because some of the decisions are pretty hair-raising, regardless. And that's not because the lawyers are hiding, because the clients are hiding behind the lawyers. It's because the judges simply don't understand. But my partner, Michael Factor, has been pushing. It's a huge push, but he is very much in favor of having setting up IP court, and it would be good, but we'll have to wait for that. Okay, there are a couple of comparison charts which I will not go through at the moment. As I said, I'll distribute this presentation. They summarize features comparing provisional US utility and Israel applications. Okay, they also compare the requirements. Okay, and again, you can have a look at this through the email. That is basically the end of the main part of the presentation. I would say the serious part. It's all serious, but we shouldn't take anything too seriously. Life is too short for that. Nonetheless, if you want any advice, anyone wants any advice about anything, clearly you did not just receive it. Okay? Advice is given to specific questions in specific circumstances. Okay, now, this was the beginning when I asked about the Coke guy. This actually has nothing to do with patents. It does have to do with trademarks. I'll let you take this in for a second. Now, back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was doing reserve duty in the Army, in certain parts of the country, if you wanted to buy a can of cola, you didn't buy Coke. You certainly didn't buy Pepsi. You bought Pips Cola. Okay, this actually is an image that I found. There's a website, and I'm really not quite sure why anyone would bother with this, but quite fascinating. It has thousands of images of beverage cans. You can choose the company, you can choose the flavor, you can choose the year. Again, I guess someone must be interested, but it was helpful here. I did a little bit of a search and this popped up. This Pips Cola image is from, I think, 1992. Now, on the right-hand side, you see a Pepsi can. Now, why did I say that Coke, we're not selling in various what would be called the occupied territories or Judea and Samaria. Okay, that wasn't sold in the, shall I say, the Arab Street. Pips Cola was. And I'll tell you why in a second. Pepsi was actually not sold anywhere. They were coming to the end of a 25-year boycott of Israel, part of the Arab boycott. Which is why, actually, if you notice at the top, there's like this yellow rim, it says Hadash, new. Because sure enough, Pepsi was new. You'll see, in fact, that on the left-hand side it says Pepsi in English, but on the right-hand side, you can just see the tops of the Hebrew lettering. So this was the original Pepsi can when Pepsi returned to Israel. But initially, it had a problem. The problem was by one Mr. Joseph Ahmad Artul. what you see next to the imprint of the can is an extract from the trademark register, which I pulled off this morning. Okay, if anyone is concerned, at the bottom, very bottom line, it says Nimchak Huznach. Basically, it's been deleted from the register. It's no longer in force. But what was the story? Pepsi boycotted Israel, okay, for about 25 years. This very enterprising Arab resident of the Galilee said, well, I manufacture drinks. I'm going to manufacture a cola. Whether he had Pepsi in mind or not is anyone's guess. You know, there was a case a few years ago where after about 17 years, after 10 or 17 years, something like that, after an Israeli company a clothing company had manufactured several Versace marks. It wasn't just Versace, it was a Versace 64 on. I don't remember exactly, but it included the word Versace very prominently. And Versace, the real Versace, came along and said, hey, you know, we now have a problem with this. It was very clear that the judge had no doubt whatsoever these marks were registered by the Israeli Versace in bad faith. Of course, the question is whether that should actually be a criterion. And again, it was a very long time after the original registration. But anyway, he then directed these marks should be deleted from the register. I don't know whether our friend here, Mr. Toole, had in mind Pepsi, but Pepsi thought he did. Pepsi wanted to come in, and they were somewhat irritated with him. And of course, he had, I don't know if at the time he actually tried to assert his trademark against them. Bottom line, they said, please go away. Here's a check for several $100,000, and this time it wasn't 3.4 billion, several $100,000. He said, well, okay. Rather enterprising. That's how Pepsi came back into the market. There is, even though this is a story from yesteryear, from the early 90s, these things do happen. There is, in fact, quite a lot of trademark litigation. There are far more trademarks filed in Israel altogether than patents. And you know, it's an exciting field. And if anyone wonders, you know, sort of apropos the fact that patents are enforceable in courts, IP is enforceable in court in Israel. And essentially, you believe that, you know, if you're right, you will win, and you will be heard out. That was that. This last thing. Yes, I spoke to Michael this morning. He said, don't forget to mention the firm. So I'm going to mention the firm. This actually is an imprint of his blog, the IP Factor, as in Michael Factor. What you actually see is an article which he put in a few days ago. It's not most up to date. He updates this on an almost everyday basis, and it is as far as I'm aware, and yes, of course I'm biased, but I believe this also is actually true. It is the only blog which religiously and in real time brings all IP news that's going on in Israel to the internet in a very, very timely and very full manner. It's also quite tongue-in-cheek. I'm not sure how British I sound, but compared to him, you know, I sound anything but British. And that, by the way, the caricature on the right, it has been recognized in various places overseas by this caricature. The particular blog item brought here, which is about Israel customs seizures, brings another aspect. We talk about enforcement. Customs authorities are very, very proactive. We are getting phone calls the whole time. When we are the registered agent for a particular mark, they seize goods, they will contact us. You know, we handle Manchester United. It's a nice, you know, high-profile name. Filed a bunch of marks for them. Of course, when we see goods which are clearly copies bearing Manchester United emblems, which have been registered as trademarks, and Manchester United gets back to us and says, we can't bother to enforce. A little bit irritating, but nonetheless, the system really, really does work. We are, as Greg said, we are one of the top firms in Israel. We have a team of attorneys and patent attorneys of about 10 or 11. I think I may have mentioned before that we recently took on another IP litigator, and we do everything. And no, I'm happy to be here today. I thank both Tom and Greg for making this possible. This brings the formal presentation to an end. Thank you for listening, and if there are any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them.
Jeremy, I'm not an attorney and certainly not an IP specialist, but in very recent years in our country, we are, as businessmen, increasingly concerned about regulation, more and more and more. And my question is, how do you see regulation in the U.S. impacting the copyright, trademark, patent world?
Well, John, the truth is I think that's probably a question which there are probably a couple of dozen people in this room that are far more qualified to answer than I am. I wouldn't even, seriously, I said before that it's something that I don't know, have no opinion on. I will say that, and I don't have an opinion on that.
Do you have any comments about regulation in other countries besides the U.S. with whom you have worked? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Or is it a subject not on your agenda?
That subject isn't on my agenda. The only thing that I would say is that I know for a fact that we mentioned a major area in which there's a lot of work going on in Israel is medical devices, healthcare business. I know that we hear this both from our U.S. associates and through our clients that try to do business in the U.S. That the position, shall we say, of regulation in the United States is something which has to be taken very, very seriously. It should be taken seriously at the time that you start planning your IP, the time you start planning what's actually going to go in to your patent applications, what you're going to protect. And anyone that ignores that is going to come a cropper. But that again, that's something that a couple dozen people here could have said. Tom?
A non-legal topic, but I'll just throw it out since you're a friend and a member in Israel. Among your clients or among Israeli innovation companies that you may know, do you have an opinion about how Atlanta, the southeastern United States, is regarded or recognized in Israel as opposed or as compared to other parts of the United States? As a business portal, a destination, that kind of thing.
Okay, so how's the Southeast regarded as a destination? First of all, I would say that I'm obviously biased by the information that I have been exposed to being a member of the Chamber. I would also say that I know that there are other areas in the United States where they make no effort whatsoever to bring business in terms of whether it's tax breaks or anything else. I have a general sense that the Southeast is highly regarded, but specifically, I have no, shall we say, immediate anecdotal, knowledge of this.
When discussing IP, you mentioned trademarks and patents. Is there a presence of copyrights similar to here? Is it non-existent or just not a registration process?
There is no, that's a good question. There is no copyright registration in Israel. There is actually a quite a new act that was passed a year or two ago, replacing the 1912 ordinance. There is often litigation on copyright issues because there is copyright. But again, the difference is that there's no registration process.
One more question?
So how do you guys deal with China and enforcement of intellectual property, Israeli technology inventions that are ripped off in China?
Oh, that's a very loaded question.
You litigate in China?
Well, the whole story of litigation in China is also very fascinating, rather scary. I remember about 20 years ago, a little bit more probably, someone came to me and said, listen, I don't get the Chinese. I've registered a patent there. I'm having some simple electronic gadget manufactured there. They're producing it around the clock, 3 shifts. 2 shifts for us, 1 shift for them. I also, round about the same time, I have a friend in the jewelry diamond business. Actually, we do quite a lot with diamonds. We're still waiting for the free samples to come though. But he had, round about that time, he visited China. And he said, you know what? China is a place which has such amazing potential, you just have to be there. This was like close to 20 years ago. I have a client who, in surgical devices, who had the unpleasant surprise of finding out several months after they went to visit a potential manufacturer in China that about 4 days before they arrived, the Chinese company had filed a industrial design application for a device that they themselves had actually patented 6 years before in the States. And it was a clear knockoff. We don't have, I would put it like this: China is among, after, for Israeli companies, after the US and Europe, I would say these days China is the 3rd destination. They're going to be finding probably also in Japan. Maybe in India, maybe Korea. China is very much up there. The question of litigation is something which none of our clients have yet really, shall we say, taken that particular bull by the horns. For what I understand, it's messy. And on the other hand, again, if you look at statistics, if you look at Israeli statistics, so it's only fair to look at Chinese statistics. There are more lawsuits, IP-related lawsuits going on in China than anywhere else in the world. That includes the US. So, and again, anyone who's been in this field for 10, 20 years, over 20 years ago, there was virtually nothing happening, virtually no firms there, maybe one firm. These days, they're like mushrooms after the rain. And in all fairness as well, we had a very nice visit to Israel by the Chinese Commissioner of Patents. And he said, someone asked a question which wasn't very diplomatic, which was to the effect, why are you guys still knocking off so much? His answer was, he answered very well. He said, well, we're trying to deal with the problem, but you should know we're the only country that